Good morning, my friends and countrymen. It is the 25th of November. I believe it's Wednesday. Not sure these days because life is strange. Life is very strange. I'm 37 and a few months older than that, and I can't believe I made it here. And I can't believe I got a lot of time left. I hope I have a lot of time left. A lot of time to do things, to make art, to talk about stuff, to push on the boundaries of the framework of this reality we all find ourselves in. The biggest question of our time is what's next? What's next? Maybe we'll get into that. But I'll tell you what's now. What's now is 3DS Max. I am not resubscribing my subscription because money reasons. So I thought I should bang out a couple quick thoughts in Max while I still have the license for it. 200 bucks a month. It's a deal if you're making money. It's an anchor if you're not. Right now, it's going to be a long, cold, dark winter, and I'm not going to be making money for a while, but that's okay. We got coffee. We got you. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to try to monitor the chats and likes and comments. Please chime in. Let me know you're here. Love to hear from you. And every comment adds to the conversation and makes the broadcast more interesting for everybody. I think. If I just ramble loosely, it can go off the rails and get really boring. What are we looking at? Well, for my art students, you should recognize this as some kind of 3D modeling package. This happens to be 3ds Max, which I had learned in college and used through my career at Firaxis and Stardock, Zynga, and Mohawk. What do we have here? This is an environment scene I've been tinkering with during the year. I probably put about 4 weeks worth of work into it. I wanted to stretch my creative legs and try making something that was a distressed organic landscape scene. I used this recently for a demo for my Micah friends. I spoke to some classes down there. Shout out to Steve Manili and his Intro to 3D class at Micah. Very fun. Let's go start from scratch and let me show you some of the most important things when doing anything in 3D. And this is for students, this is for people who are just curious about animation. Maybe you like Pixar movies, maybe you like Star Wars movies, maybe you think 3D animation is cool, maybe you play video games and you're curious, how do those things work? How do they make Link and make him wander around the screen? How do they make Mario? How do they make all this kind of stuff? Well, this might be a peek under the veil or behind the curtain and see a little bit of that if you're not familiar with it. If you are familiar with it, if you're one of my colleagues tuning in, thanks for tuning in anyway. Maybe you can add to the conversation and maybe I'm inspiring you to make a better video because this is going to be a very average video in my opinion. What are some objects here? I made a hearth that was inspired by a object I found in the woods. Some trees that are overgrown with mushrooms. A really interesting tree I got in a photograph. This is now textured and painted, and then there's some buildings in the background. These buildings are untextured at this point. They're loosely modeled in, and this is the cab of some pickup truck that I found in the woods. So I took a bunch of photos of stuff in the woods, and I've co-located them into one scene. Some mossy trees, a pallet, and some wood blocks, some wrapped fencing, something like that. Wanted to make an interesting scene maybe a player could walk through. So let me reset this scene and show you some basics of what's going on in 3D. Feel free to chime in, ask questions. Email me if you have questions too. What's the best way to do that? I respond to tomsymonds@hotmail.com. My website's tomsymonds.com. I think that if you can message me through there, it will get to me. You can find me on Facebook. If you're watching this on Facebook, you already have that link. And if you watch this on YouTube, certainly message me in the comments there and we'll find a way to communicate. Love feedback too. So if you watch the video and you have feedback on the stream, love to hear it. I'm personally working on speaking slower for instruction purposes. So we can make primitive objects. I'm using the mouse to rotate this object in the scene. One of the toughest things for students I noticed is just familiarizing themselves with the viewport, being able to move the camera around the environment. When I was coming up in school back in 2000s, there wasn't a lot of nerds as there are now. There wasn't as many nerds. So people who were playing video games, who were playing 3D interactive video games, who were using modeling package, maybe 1 in 100 at art school, maybe 1 in 50. Now it's like 1 in 10 or 1 in 5 students who have either experience navigating 3D spaces in video games. It's actually pretty common versus or 3D Max. Maybe they've been taught in 3D Max or Blender or Maya or one of these 3D softwares, ZBrush, SketchUp, even Photoshop has a 3D component. Historically, I guess some people that navigated 3D space before computers were pilots and divers and submariners. You know, how many people navigate 3D space in terms of up, left, right, you know, X, Y, Z axis? That's the most important thing to understand, first of all, is that there is an X, Y, and Z axis. I'm sorry if you hated algebra class, but geometry and algebra and basic math, it's important to have a basic understanding of some numbers and the Cartesian coordinate system when you're working in 3D. So in Max, Z is up, and then X and Y define the bottom plane. And to look at something, you can orbit around and look at it. Google Earth is really cool now. You can fire up Google Earth and use some controls with the mouse and keyboard. Learn how to operate a camera in 3D space for free. I think that's fun. You probably can use, if you're using a tablet, it's probably just a couple finger interface. I don't know how that works. So what do we have? We have vertices that are on the corners of this object, and we can manipulate those vertices in space. We can move them around, and they have a coordinate. This happens to be 14 by 18 by 35. That's the location that that's at, generally. While you weren't paying attention, I turned this into something called an edible polygon, which means I can do a whole lot of stuff to it. So the primitive shape was a box, and now that it's this edible polygon, it's a piece of geometry that I can push and pull objects from. So now that it's a poly, I can use the number keys 1 through 5 to select elements of this or parts of it. Terminology gets kind of confusing and messed up. So if you're watching this video, hopefully you're just getting the gist of it. The specific terms will change software package to software package. So this would be a quad or a polygon, the face on top. I can rotate this. I can scale it. The hotkeys Q, W, E, R, and T. The T is top view. So it's Q, W, E, and R allow me to manipulate this surface. Now Max 2021 lets me do some pretty cool stuff too, where I can hold shift and move it and it extrudes that object. I can hold shift and scale it and it creates an inset to that object. Now I can move this around. There's even some really neat stuff like I can like shift through and it'll Boolean. Sometimes if it's perfectly coplanar, I can do some interesting stuff. I can subdivide this and make more cuts for manipulating the geometry. All these buttons up in the top are different controls for that. One that my friend Josh Hardy turned me on to is Swift Loop. This is a button that allows me to put a loop anywhere. A loop is a series of edges that goes around the entire object and connects back to itself like a belt. So let's click that in there, and now I have a new line of vertices. Why is this really important? Let me take you to the next level. The meta level here, this is a very simple primitive shape. If we want to make this super smooth and more realistic, we probably want to add more information. So it's lit better, because lighting works on data in this space. Let me add a modifier to this called Turbo Smooth. And that'll average out and smooth all the geometry together. I can maintain the smoothing groups, which are the sides, assignment for blending on the sides of the object. And I can also turn the iterations of this up, how many times Max subdivides this. If you're looking closely, you can see that the geometry of the square is maintained within the subdivision of this object. But the lighting should get better and better and better as it is subdivided. So what if we want to maintain the cube size, but we want, or shape, I should say, the cube shape, but we want it to have rounded edges. This is something I learned from Dave Black over at 4Axis. Let's convert it to an editable poly. Let's add some loops. He called this edge tensioning, and I think this is super cool and really important when it comes to doing hard surface modeling. If you're modeling a vehicle, a car, a tank, an airplane, something like that. I just put 3 loops. I basically parallel lined this corner here. When I hit turbo smooth on this, now you can see it's actually maintaining that rounded edge. And I can go underneath the stack here and manipulate some of these loops. There's a button here, I think it's like show end result. Yeah, so I'm working on a layer, I'm working on an operation underneath the final view. So the stack in 3D Max is all the operations that you can manipulate, pardon me, kind of like layers in Photoshop. But here I can take that loop and manipulate it, and you can see I'm adjusting the tensioning of that corner. How tight is that corner? We can make it super tight. So the orange would be the bottom stack, and the black lines would be the top of the stack. And let's turn that turbo smooth up so we see more information, and we can see what this looks like. Nice and tight in that corner. That's going to light really nice. If I turn off the wireframe, we get a nice, tight, soft edge, whereas the rest of the object has been rounded out and averaged out. That's edge tensioning. Super important when you're doing subdivision displacement stuff or subdivision. Important for down the road. How do we make this thing look good? In default max view, we're just dealing with a light that is generally put over the right hand side of the viewer. And it's a simple light designed just for working on the model. It's like having a flashlight taped to the side of your head. But what if we want to render this and make it look like it exists in the real world? Well, as I talked about in some of my illustration tutorials, having a 3-point lighting source is a good way to do that. You're symbolizing the sun, the sky, and bounce light off the ground for the most part. With 3 lights, you can make something feel like it exists in the most simple way. So we're going to drop in 3 lights. Instead of standard primitives, I'm going to go over to lights. So there's a lot of different buttons here. It takes a long time to get used to, but you guys are younger than me, hopefully, and you learned this stuff faster than old Tom. Let's go to standard lights. I'm going to drop in 3 Omni lights. Boom, boom, boom. They're not showing up right now. I think there's a way to make them work. I think it's Control L. There we go. So Control L switches the lighting source from the modeling light to whatever lights you've dropped into the scene. And right now it's only rendering one of them. It's probably because it's in default mode. I could turn it on to some kind of high quality there we go, high quality rendering in the viewport. And now we can see we have 3 light sources. This one in the middle here, I can move this around, I can move it up top. It's going to be kind of hard to define these right now, so what I'm going to do is color them. Let's have one light on the left. I'm going to call that the key light. Let's keep it that yellow. That yellow is pretty good. Let's go to the next one. I'm going to call this one the fill light. Let's make that a different color. How about a pink? And then we will change the color to be pink. Cool. And then let's go to the third one. We're going to call that the rim light. And we're going to make this a blue light that represents the sky. Now let's just see what this is like. Okay. It's a little hard to see this red light down here in contrast with the gray background. But you get the sense. Now we can see there's a little bit of blue, a little bit of red in the middle, and this white light on the left. Let's give it a little bit of yellow just so it stands out a little bit more. Just a little bit of warmth. There we go. Very clear now. We can see these 3 colors. Let me turn this object around, and then we can see those 3 colors pretty easily. All right, but they're all flat. When I put these lights down, they all go to the ground plane. So when you click and drag on something, it just goes into the middle of the ground plane of 3D Max, which is a virtual 3D space. So I'm going to place these lights in a triangular arrangement. So if I go to the top view, let's have my key light here on the left. Let's have my fill light on the right, and the rim light is going to be behind. And then as we rotate the camera around, by the way, I'm rotating by holding Alt and middle mouse button. Let's lift these three lights up to be above the object, or at least parallel with it. That rim light is going to go high into the rear. The fill light is going to come more into the front. So what is our scene? Do we want to think about it like a stage? Where's the point of view coming from? If I just hit F for front point of view, that might be the, your generic point of view from the audience. And maybe I put a camera in that region just so that we always know where the audience is looking from. So I'm going to come over one more, grab a target camera, and that means I can click on the target, and then when I release the click, it drops a target point. That target point I can move somewhere, maybe in the middle of the object, and then the camera I can move around too. How do I view from this camera? I think it's Control C, is that right? No, I think that drops the camera. What is it, just C? Just C. Hit the C button, and now I'm looking through the camera's point of view. I realize some of my controls are off screen here, so let me manipulate 3D Max just a little bit. So I'm going to scale the window to match my streaming space here. So if you're just joining, thanks for hanging out. My name's Tom. You should know that by now if you're watching on Facebook. I have coffee. It's Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So we're in the camera point of view, but our lights went away. What happened? Well, up in the left corner are these bracketed terms that describe the parameters of the viewport we're looking through. And right now it's saying standard, as in standard shading model. We want to put that to high quality just to see what our lights are. Why does that matter? Well, the high quality rendering is going to be more graphics card intensive. So as your scene gets more and more and more complex, it's going to slow down because your graphics card and your computer can only render so many times per second depending on complexity. More complexity, lower rendering times. I recommend all my students stay simple. Low polygon counts, low triangle counts, few lights, less transparency, less particle effects. Max, these softwares are so powerful, they really let you hang yourself. If you put too much stuff into a scene, it will start to chug. So 3-point lighting, suddenly this object's starting to feel more realistic. Don't you think you can grab this thing? It almost feels like your brain says, that's an object in the real world. I'm going to go reach out and grab that slice of cheese or bread or a rubber ball. I don't know what it is, but it's something that I can tangibly hold, which is it's a different feeling than if those lights are off. Those lights are off and we're back to just the default light. This looks quite artificial. This isn't very real-world lighting. A lighting environment in which you have a harsh underground reflection, plus this is just not common in the real world to have something that flat and abstract in terms of lighting. So let's go back to the other thing. Another object that you should add is probably a ground plane. Go back to the primitives, add a plane underneath all of this, and suddenly this object is grounded. Part of this high quality rendering is it is drawing shadows for me in real time. This is not something I had 15 years ago when I was learning Max. Real-time shadows were pretty bad. You had to hit something called render. You had to actually give the computer time to process all these shadows. So in the past, I couldn't have a preview. I was probably looking at something like this. I might not even had this shadow a long time ago. So I would have to hit this render button, which is up in the upper right corner, render frame window. And it looks like it's not rendering anything. Why is that not rendering anything? I want to select the point of view. So let me let's go to the render setup. What's it rendering from? Area to render, usually a way to set the camera. Half my time in Max is just like, where's the button for the thing I want it to do? Where's the button for the thing I want it to do? I'm gonna hit Alt W, which gives me a quad viewport. So camera 1, right? Let's hit Alt W again to get to this point of view. If I render a still frame, oh, I had to hit the render button. That's what it was. Why you dark, bro? Where'd my lights go? It's probably using something I don't want it to use. I don't want it to use Arnold. I want it to use just the standard renderer. Sign renderer, default hardware. Let's go scanline. There we go. That used to work. The old reliable scanline renderer. There we go. Okay. Something with Arnold. I think Arnold requires physically based materials. Arnold should not be the default renderer, but that's just this man's opinion. So we just have to wait to see how the lights looked and stuff. You just have to hit the render button and then wait for it to pop out. Now, graphics cards are so freaking powerful that they can do a lot of this stuff real time. Plus, all those brilliant eggheads over at Autodesk have written some really impressive code that renders this stuff out real time. All that graphics engine stuff you see in video games is a bunch of comp sci geniuses writing amazing code. And before those guys, it was the eggheads over at Pixar writing amazing code. So letter B likes the video. KT likes the video. Thanks, you two. Miss you, bread man. Brandon up in the Cusco Orangemen. You think there's basketball this winter? I would love some college basketball in my life. Jake likes the video and Drew likes the video. Thanks, guys. What up? The letter B is watching. Miss you, buddy. Well, I would love to teleport up there and give you all a big hug and see the baby. So, thinking about you all the time. See, isn't this more fun? We have interaction. It's more fun. We're having a good time. What are you eating today? What's on the menu up in upstate? Having guests on the stream also makes teaching the lesson a little more complicated. What's the next most important thing? Well, you know, sometimes with the 3-point lighting method, you do get an over brightening of the ground. So let me go back to this lighting method, and we have this almost distracting array of shadows here. And the ground plane seems to be lighter than the sky plane. So this plane happened to come out purple. Let's change this to a darker color. We can even make it a customized color. Let's add a custom color here. Let's make it really dark and earthy. See, that feels immediately a lot better. Another thing you can do is you can, in Max, because this is virtual, we can assign these abstract rules to everything. So sometimes, just like a painting, you don't have to make every single leaf on the tree to make it a believable tree. You can mass conceive, you can just make a bunch of green and a little highlight at the top and a little shadow at the bottom, and it feels like a puff of leaves all together. Just like that, we can assign and abstract some of these parameters so things in 3D Max do or don't do what we want them to do. In this case, I can have the rim light in the upper right. Let me move this around so you can see what it's doing. I can have it illuminate just the object in the middle and not the ground plane. There's a way to do that. I think it's in the properties. Oh no, it's there's a general parameters thing and over in the modifier stack, and there's a button called exclude, and you can go through the objects in your scene, and I can select the plane and move it to the exclude area, hit OK, and now it is still rendering in the viewport, but I think if I hit the render button, it won't. So let's hit a quick render and boom. So now we're getting all 3 lights on the piece of cheese, but only the key and fill are illuminating the ground plane. This is pretty handy when you're doing 3D stuff for games, previs, animation, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. Another way to light stuff that's very effective is using a skylight. It might be an old trick these days, but I still like it because, again, it's reliable. Some of these old tricks in art have stuck around since the Renaissance, not because they're cutting edge and awesome, it's because they work. And they've worked for a very long time. And plus, I'm old, it's harder to learn new stuff, so I'm sticking with what worked for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you the skylight. Click that in there, and it's just this little half dome apparatus. I'm going to go to something called Light Lister, and this gives me a view of all the different lights in my scene, and I'm going to turn off key, fill, and rim, leave the skylight on, and then my preview is giving me this pretty nice rendering, actually, which is showing what skylight's doing. Skylight is sending light information from a dome, an invisible imaginary dome around the object, and it's sending light rays in. And the shadows are coming from a principle called ambient occlusion, which means the narrower a texel's view is of the sky, the less bright it's going to be. The more a single texel's point of view of the sky is, the bigger it is, the more light it gets. So you can calculate ambient occlusion multiple different ways. Using a skylight is kind of a brute force way to do it. I believe the skylight is sending photons from everywhere and illuminating the surface without bounce. Radiosity and light tracing involves bouncing the lights around and giving really cool, like picking up colors from one surface and sending them into another. That takes a long time to calculate. And then there's mental ray and other ways that calculate ambient occlusion. Real-time game engines use ambient occlusion by looking at the texel. The texel can see how much of the sky it can see, and it self-illuminates. If it doesn't see a whole lot of the sky, it's pretty dark. If it sees a lot of the sky, it's pretty light. It's actually a pretty quick way to calculate shadows. But what we're noticing is this, because of this ambient occlusion effect, the darkening around the base, this feels tangible, doesn't it? We don't have 3-point lighting anymore. We have something like 1,000-point lighting. My friend from college, my colleague Jay Gillen, very extremely talented artist, extremely hardworking artist, figured out how to make his own. Before we had this tool in Max, he figured out how to do it through forums and friends manually by creating these huge arrays of Omni lights, like hundreds of thousands of Omni lights in a pattern, and then rendering it that way. And that was pretty effective. It was pretty effective back in 2003. It wasn't the prettiest thing, but it rendered faster than using one of the algorithms you can get online. Everything's so different now. Everything is like changing and adapting so quick that I'm sure there are people watching this video now or years from now who are like, man, this is some old school hoo-ha, whatever. But hooey, is that the right phrase? Hoo-ha might be something else, Jojo. But hoo-ha is whatever. I don't know. I know the army guys go hoo-ha, hoo-ha, hoo-ha. My brother Tim always does that. Hoo-ha, hoo-ha. And the Marines go hoorah, don't they? Is that right, Drew? Actually, it's Derek was the Marine. I had a question for Drew. Does your brother ever go hoorah or semper fi? Does he ever do like Marine Corps phrasing when he's hanging out with the family? He's just like sitting on the couch hanging out and he goes to sleep and he's like, hoorah! Just kind of making noises from his Marine Corps days. I would like to know. Would like to know. Letter B sends hearts. Thanks, Letter B. Love you, man. Let's get to the next point. Let's get to the next point. So 3D objects are cool. You can do a lot with 2D objects in 3D too. I use little planes, little cards all the time. Like if you want to make grass, you're not going to model out every single blade. It's just not efficient. So something you can do is create a plane and give it some transparency. You could do a lot of stuff like that. So for instance, let's go back to my other, instead of making it from scratch, let me go back to that demo. So instead of modeling, this object here has front, left, side geometry to it. And then these little blades of grass in the back here, these are just flat planes. And I should be able to open up, I've painted a texture on this stuff. To work on this in 2 dimensions, you flatten it out. These are the geometry represented in 2 dimensions instead of all 3. And then I can slap a texture on this thing. And that's not my texture. I want to see my texture on this. Something called materials. Let's see, I put this material on there, and that material looks like this in the diffuse, which is just like the albedo colors. I know I'm defining one complicated thing with another complicated thing. Red, green, and blue colors. And then underneath of that should be some transparency. There's an opacity map setting here. Let's view that image. And black would be transparent and white is solid. You know this if you've worked in any kind of transparent masking for either media or print. So you've seen I've drawn all these little blades of grass here. Now you could just reuse the same blade of grass over and over again, but I chose to randomize it a little bit for colors. The green outline you're seeing here is the geometry, and I can turn that off by hitting F3, something like that. Maybe I have to deselect it. Yeah, deselecting it, and now you don't see the edges, you just see the painted areas with the transparency behind it. This is pretty effective. Depending on the lights you're using, they'll either render clear shadows or not. Like in this high quality active view, this real-time view, we're not getting a really good shadow or anything. I think if I hit render though, it'll give me a much better view of what I'm doing. Let's see. Is this giving me any kind of... It's not giving me what I want. Oh, here it goes. It just took a time. It took a minute to calculate. So with the lights in this scene being the light tracing element, which is using that skylight I just talked about, combined with the primary key rim light setup, it's going to take a little bit longer to calculate all those rays bouncing around, all that light bouncing around. But we should get a much higher quality render. This looks like it's being rendered pretty high resolution too, like a 1200. Let's simplify this a little bit. Let's cancel that. Let's go to Tools, Light Lister. Let me see what I have set. I have shadow maps. The skylight is off. Let's turn the skylight on, and then let's adjust our render settings just to make it a little bit faster. Advanced lighting, we're using something called Light Tracer. I'm going to turn down the rays per sample to like 25 instead of 250. That should speed it up a whole lot. You can adjust some of this filter size bias. You just reference the 3D Max help tutorial for what all these different settings do. But right now, raise per sample 25 instead of 250. That should speed it up a whole lot. Also, the resolution is pretty high. This was 1920 by 1080. Let's just preview this in like 400 by 600. That's a lot less stuff to do. This should be a lot faster. Okay, this is going now. This is cooking. Cooking with gas. What's up, Rob? Rob says you are correct, Tom. Hua. Yeah, Rob, you're a veteran, right? Were you Army Guard? Did you deploy? We've had this conversation before. I'm sorry, I forget. He says, lol, also, should I use skylights at work? We use the Scanline Omni, so nothing fancy. Good. Yeah, I think they work, right? All right, so what we're seeing in this render is there's not a lot of shadow information. We have some grounding ambient occlusion type stuff, but we're not getting direct shadows and stuff. So now I have to turn on some better shadow controls. If I go to my key light, let's change the shadow map to let's do a ray trace shadow. Let's see how that works out. And let's find where that light is in the scene. The key light's over here. Let's make the key light a little bit more direct. You see, we're getting some nice ray trace lighting in the preview right now. Glad to see Rob tuning in. Rob's a former student of mine from Art Institute of York, Pennsylvania. Very cool, very cool. He was the best of his class. I can say that with confidence. And I don't think anyone would disagree. And my brother was always like, hooah, hooah. I was like, hey, Uncle, hey, Rick, hey, Timmy, can we go get some cookies? Hooah, hooah, let's get some cookies. Drive me over to Mrs. Fields or something. Send me cookies. So you got to go run now. I'm like, I'm an art student. I'm not in the Army. I'm not going to run. So, well, you're going to get fat. And here we are. Here we are. And he's still in shape. He's like 57 years old and runs like 4 miles a day. The old lieutenant colonel. So now we're seeing some more direct lighting stuff. Now we're seeing shadows from each individual blade of grass being cast in the scene. But it takes time. Let me show you some other thing. So if let's say let's turn this skylight off. Tools, light lister. Let me turn off the skylight. Let me turn off the light tracer in the rendering setting. Advanced lighting, turn light tracer off. And let's go to tools. Let's go back to that light lister and just put a shadow map back on. Shadow maps are pretty fast, and you can make them even faster. Let's hit render real quick and just see what that does. Real fast. See how quick that rendered? It was instant. But let's do it again. F9. Boom. Done. Rendered. No problem at all. This is also pretty boring. Let me adjust some of the lights a little bit to make it more interesting. Light lister. These colors are very simple. Let me crank it up just to be a little bit louder. Let's go red. Let's do more of like a bronzy kind of orange light maybe. And then that sunlight. Let's crank it up. More orange. And then over bright. Let's make it like 1.8. Let's see what that does. That's a little bit more lively. Get a little more vibration in there. Let me just add a shadow. Ray traced shadow on the key. What does that look like? Okay, a lot more dynamic. Those shadows are doing some interesting stuff. But the graphics feel like 1997, right? This feels like Mist 1 or something. This feels very primitive in terms of the way lighting is. It's still pretty quick though. I mean, look at that. F9, boom. That's done fast. And this is probably what I want for students. If I was to teach a class right now, I would be having students, I would do exactly what I'm doing for you now. I demonstrate all these things, but I would say for the first 4 weeks, I want you to work very simply with primitive shapes, 3-point lighting, and one of those lights has ray traced shadows on it, just to understand like the fundamentals of stuff. And then we can start adding in more and more and more complexity. But there's so many things to learn. How polygons work, all the modeling tools within Max. So this is a pretty primitive scene here. Let me show you guys something a little bit more advanced. This is some simple geometry. How does this stuff come together with some advanced geometry? Rob, we're going to load up an AR for you. Let's see if I can find that. Probably this file right here. Let's not save that. So here we have a higher resolution model. And when you have more resolution, you're going to automatically get better lighting, more interesting. When you have more details, you're going to make a more interesting image. So here we have a high poly rifle I'm doing for a potential video game project. I wanted to add something in my portfolio that demonstrated what I know about hard surface modeling and also unwrapping and texturing and stuff. Haven't gotten to that point yet, still in the modeling phase. So this is just the standard viewport. We have the rifle in its different parts, upper, lower, sights, optics, grips, triggers, stocks, all that kind of stuff. Let's change the viewpoint to high quality. I think high quality automatically gives us some of this ambient occlusion type stuff. If I turn off my wireframe, should be F3 or F4. I hit the F3 and F4 keys compulsively to give me what I want here. We can start to see as I move the camera, the lighting changes and I let it settle down, and then the engine does all the computing for that ambient occlusion factor. That's giving us these nice shadows on the interior of the ejection port and the gap between the holographic sight and the magnifier, and in between every single slice of that 1913 Picatinny rail, the ambient occlusion function that is built into the renderer is giving us these nice soft shadows. Now something I haven't, the lighting in this scene, I think I have at least 2 lights, it looks like. I have a blue light and I've got a warmer light here. Yeah, this is like a slightly yellow. I like going slightly yellow with my key light and then a little bit over bright, maybe like 1.3, 1.4. That way, I learned this from Greg Furch over at Firaxis when they were doing the pre-production video for XCOM 1 or XCOM Enemy Unknown, how you can use lights with overbright to do some interesting effects. Especially like, it's kind of fun to like do an overbright rim. So maybe you have like a 1.5 warm light, and what that'll do is it'll illuminate most of the object with that warm color you like, and then the hot spot will be white, will be pure white or overbright, which is pretty good. And then the blue, let's go to the blue over here. Reference plane, let me hide that. Let me hide this. Hide. Let's put the rim over here. Let's put the key over here, and let's turn off the skylight so we can see very clearly. So we have our rim on one side and our key on the right side here. Let's go to perspective view instead of a orthographic view. We're getting a little bit of converging perspective lines now when I change my point of view. Point of view is a little wide. I can go fisheye. I can go a little bit more telephoto. 50mm lenses, the 50mm setting for cameras inside 3D Max is the most acceptable field of view for the human eye. If you wanted to put a camera in this scene, which I should do just for the sake of demonstration, I would set that camera to have a 50mm lens. So this cone shows us that viewport. I hit C, and now I can see the camera. There's a couple controls in here. There's an orbit control. I can actually orbit and rotate the camera. I can dolly it in and out, and I can animate all these things too. But animating's for another day. If I wanted to move the camera, I can actually have turn my auto key on. I can put the camera somewhere, maybe like let's orbit it and truck it back here, and then move my timeline to 90, and then I can orbit it in a little bit and zoom it in. I get so much junk phone calls these days. It's unbelievable. Something like that. And so now I can scrub back and forth, and Max has remembered this movement, which is pretty cool. That's the real power of 3D Max, is just about anything can be animated within Max in some way. We get into bones and animation controllers for another day. But you can just grab primitive shapes and move them with this auto key thing on, and that's how you get movement. You can move the lights around too if you want your lights to change, but we want this to feel like a realistic object that we can grab and touch within the point of view of the viewer. And what did I say before? How many lights do you need to add to make it believable? 3. Right now we only have 2. Let's see what a third light will do for us. So we have our rim, W to pick, sorry, the rim's back here. Let's call it Omni 2 rim, and let's change that color to make it easier for us. That's just the viewport color, and the actual color it emits is somewhere else. Let's go to the key light. Maybe let's put the key light over here. Let's copy that. Hold shift and drag. It gives us a copy. We're going to call that Omni 03 fill. And I love a nice deep Sithy red. Let's get Sithy with it. Yeah, it's fun. Over here somewhere. Let's orbit our camera around to see where we're coming from. Let's put the key a little bit higher. Let's put the fill a little bit lower. Let's put the rim a little bit further away. And if the rim is on the opposite side, we can really crank that sucker up. Let's make it like 5. What does that look like? Wow, how exciting is that? Look at how dynamic and interesting this is looking now. So we've got like a little warm light on the left. We got that super bright rim behind it. And this is starting to look like it's in a photo studio. That Sithy red is really rich. You probably want to move that Sithy red over a little bit less. It sounds like sissy, and I don't like that word sissy very much. So we're going to change the phrase we use. We're going to do blood red. And let's give it a nice blood red color. Let's add a custom color in here, like a deep, I don't like that. Something down here. How's this? How's this? That's exciting. And then we want to copy that. I think sometimes we can just like pick a color from the viewport, which is pretty cool. So I was able to use this color picker, and you can just pick something that already exists. So that's, wait, pick that. Okay, good. Let's set that to 1. Let's put it over here. Let's put it on the ground. We're kind of simulating some kind of bounce light. And then this, let's make that a little bit more yellow. Let's see what this looks like. How's that? That's kind of fun. So we're getting this vibration. We're getting this 3-point vibration. And if I was to get psychological or metaphysical or something about why 3, why does it have to be 3 points? What else is 3? Let's find a connection. What else is 3 in this environment? Well, X, Y, and Z. If we only have the X and the Y, we have a very two-dimensional image. So the colors of those lights are only giving us information along 2 axes. When you get a third light, that gives you a third point on that 3-dimensional plane. So your lights, in a way, are these measuring sticks for information. That takes us to normal mapping. If you ever wondered why normal mapping works, if you know what I'm talking about, it's about simulating bumps and textures and information using a texture map that simulates angles of incidence. That has everything to do with lights. Like you can make a normal light or a normal map manually by putting a red light on one side, a blue light on another, and a green light on another along the X, Y, and Z axis, and illuminating the object that you want to simulate using these lights in different ways. It's very sciencey. It's very sciencey. But maybe I think that's what it is. I think the 3-point lighting is essential for these levels of color to inform the viewer along the red, the green, the blue of what the depth is. So we have the blue rim light is telling us what's kind of looking away. And then the key light is what's looking this direction, and the fill light's what's looking this direction. And then with those 3 points of reference, the 3 points of light represent angles. The human eye can better understand the direction of those surfaces. Right? So maybe this lighting is a little artificial. It also has to do with the material surface, the material properties of the object itself. This happens to be a very shiny material. What happens if I turn that material's shininess down? The specularity right here is pretty high. It's got a 92% specularity. Let me bring the specularity down. Let me make the highlights flat white and maybe a lighter gray. And let's turn that diffuse down to a darker, less colorful metallic. Turn the glossiness down to be more flat. See, now this has a very different feel. Just because of the material that's on this shape, it has a very different feel now. What happens if we hit the render button? There we go. Pretty flat, pretty flat. If we want more contrast, we can turn the shadows on. Let me go turn the light lister. Let's make this, so we have a shadow map, ray traced shadows. Let's turn them all on ray trace. Let's see what that does. Ray trace, ray trace, ray traced. Let's see what that does. Let's hit the render button. Pretty sharp, but we're not getting so much ambient occlusion that we would have liked. So let's try turning that light lister effect on. Turn the skylight on. Let's make it like a blue. Might be fun. Might be fun to have like a bluish skylight. Why not? Let's turn it down just a little bit. It's pretty cool. Turn that down just a little bit. Fill, turn that one down just a little bit. That's cool. Something like that. We're experimenting here, ladies and gentlemen. Go to render settings. Advanced lighting. Let's do light tracer. Let's set it to 50. And let's see what this looks like. We should be getting some ambient occlusion type effects here. All right, it's all a little over bright. Everything is just like a little, there's no like true, the background's so dark too, it's like hurting some of our internal contrast. Let's change the background. Environment is set to black. Let's set it to gray. Like a dark gray would be pretty good. And I want some real high contrast darks. Make sure the ambient is off. I probably have an ambient setting on this. There's a self-illumination setting. So you can make this thing self-illuminate any color. If I wanted it to be like bright green, I can turn this bright green and like suddenly the thing is lighting itself up bright glowing green. These are some of the properties that I can mess with in the materials. Bright glowing green thing, that'd be kind of cool. It doesn't actually cast light out. I don't know, let's copy that material and let's leave the bolt carrier like let's just call it the material like bright green, Gren, I don't know, and let's just add that to the bolt carrier group, and then everything else, let's turn that self illumination off completely. Is transparency on now? It's very weird. It looks very washed out. I'm canceling that by hitting escape. Self illumination is up to 100%. Okay, let's turn the self illumination off. Let's render that again. Now we're getting the contrast I wanted. What I'd forgotten, ladies and gentlemen, is that when I'm modeling, I actually like to put a little self-illumination on my material. That way nothing goes to full black. I can actually still see details on the shadow side of the object. So while I'm working, I'll throw a little self-illumination on it. But then when I render it, I have to remember to turn that off. Hey, there's more comments. Rob said, Lowell, you're good. I was Army Reserve and was done with my contract last year. Congratulations. Never got deployed, but my unit did like right when I got out. Oh, they deployed like right when you got out. Wow, you're lucky. Rob says, also, thanks for the love, man. I appreciate the comments. I definitely work hard and thought your class was great. I'm glad you thought my class was great, too. That was fun. Rob said, damn, bro, that gun came out nice. Thanks, Rob. This is a lot of work. It's still not done, and I've been distracted with illustration projects. Plus, 3D Max is just hard, as maybe you guys are all seeing out there. It's complicated, and it really takes a strong focus and motivation to finish something. I've been on this thing back and forth for years. It's like a slow freaking passion project. Plus, there's a gazillion better gun modelers out there. This is just something I happen to know a lot about, and it's a tangible like portfolio piece for game development. So this year, like what I did on this, Rob, if you're still out there, is I just did the sight, the rear sight, and the holographic stuff. The rest of the body is mostly the same. I think I did a little bit of optimization on the geometry because this is all really complicated geometry in here. But I had a really good time making this rear sight. This was pretty complicated and interesting to try to replicate actual machined. You know, it gives you an appreciation by trying to remake something from scratch, even if it's virtual or if it's a drawing, you appreciate the hand that made the subject. Maybe that's why people like drawing figure, because it appreciates life. In the process of studying figure or drawing from still life, you appreciate the world that exists around you, and you're able to process it through a different part of your brain and understand what's going on there. I got a couple objects that are just kind of floating around here. Let me hide those. Doing these cuts to make like I even got in and started making like the screws correct and stuff. It's just being obsessive compulsive about this model. And I have all the different components and parts and stuff. It's fun. I can move things around and monkey with it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if there isn't any questions, I want to wrap this up. What did we talk about? We talked about lighting. We did a little bit about materials. I think the talk about painting will be another video at some point. We've been going for about an hour right now. This is what I want to see from students. I want to see you get obsessive compulsive about something, really nerd out on it, show me what's interesting to you, teach me something, make art about something that you think is important that the rest of the world doesn't understand, and express it in the way only you can, your unique voice, whatever that happens to be. This has been a lot of fun. I wanted to bang out a quick video in Max while I still had the license for it, and thanks for being an audience to pay attention. And also let me show off a little show and tell with the Tom Tom today. It's important, something. Let's reflect on the times we live in a little bit. I think I was very confused when friends of mine on Facebook were talking about silence is violence up in the beginning of the year, and I just thought, if I'm, I mean, how are you going to listen if you're not quiet? You can't listen and talk at the same time. So being an audience, being a listener is an important position to have. For someone in the community to feel like they're heard, there has to be someone paying attention. So it's okay and important to be that audience member. And you don't have to make content all the time. You don't have to be a star all the time. My friend Joe and I were talking recently about the idea that when you're a kid, a good parent will tell you you can grow up and be anything you want. You can be big, you can be huge, you can do whatever you want. And that's not realistic. Not everyone can be big. Not everyone can be huge in terms of star power or political power or anything like that. But what is true is everyone can be important. Everyone can be important. Everyone can be uh, that ball bearing in the machine that keeps the wheel spinning. If that ball bearing breaks or it doesn't get lubricated, it might seize up the whole system and the whole machine comes to a halt. Just that tiny little screw that's holding the regulator to the operator to the gearbox or thing, everything like that. Every little piece of the automobile is important in some way. Can it run without those pieces? Sure, but it's not going to run as smooth. It's not going to run as clean. So every little piece is important, and everyone in society is an important piece of society, right? So just don't damage the rest of the pieces next to you, and I think you've done a good job. All right. So thanks so much for hanging out. Here was a little bit of Tom's video of 3D Max stuff today. And is there anything else I really want to talk about? Let's go back to the class demo real quick. Again, here is the demo I did for class. This is a much simpler object than that rifle, but it's probably good enough for an independent game. I was playing recently a game called The Outer Wilds with my friend Dorian. Really cool, recommended by my friend Mike LeGrand. Or was it Ike? It might have been Ike Ellis. I forget. Sorry, Mike, if it wasn't you. If it was Ike, not Mike. Or Jason. Not sure. Cool game, though. And there's a lot of space for independent, low definition, high value gaming out there. I'm looking for a game right now. I'm looking for a new game to get obsessed about. If you guys are playing something really cool, let me know in the comments. Send me a message, Rob. What are you playing lately? I'm not into the Battle Royale games anymore. I played a ton of Battle Royale when I was at Mohawk, and it's just frustrating. I find that I'm in a mental place where I don't want to be shooting other humans in video games. Zombies are cool. Villains from history. Like I play a World War II game with my friend Steve Egri, but I'm commanding the troops to do the combat, and I know there's like they're little imaginary allies and Axis soldiers, and that's fine. When I'm playing Factorio, I'm happy to kill all the aliens and feel dominant over the aliens, but once I come to the certain dominance point, I get kind of bored. So I'm really interested in like a builder. If there's some kind of builder game where I can make a farm and also defend my village from some kind of invader or aliens, I think that'd be kind of fun. That's what I would be into. I really liked back in the day. I used to play with some of my former friends, Jess, Sven, and Lauren. This game called 7 Days to Die. Chad and Ryan got the privilege of playing with that group of people, and that was really fun. It was like a commune that you and your friends could build and protect from zombies that came every 7 days. Like you would go out during the nighttime, excuse me, during the daytime. You would go out, gather resources, and at night the zombies were more active. That was a cool game. That was a really, really cool game. Nice to have these communities of stuff you can do to have fun with. So thanks so much. Hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. That was my thoughts What is the future going to be? If you ask Tom, I would think that us older folk who grew up before the pandemic are going to have a harder time adapting to the post-pandemic world. But people who are young and living through the pandemic have have a much better idea of how to live in pandemic situations. So they're going to be more prepared for this pandemic kind of future. The same way that China, even though they made either by accident or on purpose this virus, were more prepared for it. They went through SARS and other versions of these respiratory diseases. So they were just more adapted already to what the world would be like after this thing was unleashed. However, us in the West haven't had a respiratory pandemic for 100 years, and no one's alive from back then, so we don't have a good idea of what to do. But now we do, and everything going faster is going to be better. Thanks again. Pay attention to the young ones. They're going to lead the way through this. I think they're going to lead the way. Pay close attention to kids coming out of college in the next 3 years. They're gonna have insights on what the future is going to be. Have a great afternoon, everybody.